Oh, it is. Okay. I think we'll start, shall we? Yeah. Right, good morning, members. With a slight issue with the technology. There was a power cut last night, so we may not be able to broadcast, but it's in process at the minute. But we're hoping that there will be a recording of this meeting. If anyone, it is fixed. A voice in my right ear suggests that it has been fixed, so welcome to any members of the public who are listening in. And sorry for the slight delay caused by last night's power cuts. Before we start, I'd like to introduce two of our recently appointed officers. Sitting at the back next to Brian is Hannah Turner, who is our new Head of Assets and Enterprise. And on her right is Ben Cookson, who is our Interim Finance Manager. Hannah is just observing, so you're asked to be on your best behaviour. And Ben will be presenting a report later in the authority meeting. So you can behave however you wish when you receive his report. So thank you for that. If we can carry on, I have apologies for absence, agenda item 1, from Councillors Heath, Chaplin, O'Leary and Murphy, and from Ms Harling. Does anyone bring any other apologies from any members? If not, we move on to item 2, which is minutes of the last meeting, with two last meetings. I'd like to take them separately in case there are any issues that people wish to raise. So the first set is the minutes of Friday the 10th of October. Are there any issues that anyone wishes to raise, any corrections rather that anyone wishes to make to that document? I have one where it says, partway through the bullet points in Chair's briefing, it says Derbyshire Archaeological Society, and it should be Derbyshire Archaeological Advisory Committee. I shall have to improve my diction in future, I think. If there are no other corrections, can we receive those as a correct record of the meeting, please? At show of hands. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's accepted, thank you. And then the minutes of the meeting of Friday the 1st of December 23. Again, are there any corrections that anyone wishes to make? If not, can we accept them as a correct record of the meeting, please? All those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Any objections? That's unanimous. Oh, sorry, Matt. Matt, there's one abstention. In that case, we move on to agenda item 3. I've not been informed of any urgent business. Agenda item 3, nor have I been informed of any public participation. Agenda item 4. Agenda item 5 then, are there any members' declarations of interest that anyone wishes to make? Speak now or forever. No declarations of interest, so thank you, members. We move on to the Chair's briefing. A relatively quiet period for me because thankfully Christmas and New Year intervened. So other than attending Planning Committee and Programme and Resources Committee and members' fora and workshops, with the Chief Exec in early December, we met with Lord and Lady Manners for discussion of things various, but that included the discussion of the cycle connection between Bakewell and Roseley, which was quite positive. I participated in an interview for the Head of Resources, which unfortunately was unsuccessful, and that recruitment process is ongoing. And then in mid-December, there was a National Parks England board meeting via Teams, a brief one, an hour, with updates on a variety of issues, including the proposal for a Paul Hamlin Award. Remember that Paul Hamlin was the previous Chief Exec who unfortunately died last year. And there's going to be, in conjunction with his family, a set of awards on an annual basis that's being worked up for the future. And then it was things like we were introduced to the plans for what National Parks England was going to be doing in 2024. There was then a face-to-face National Parks England board meeting in Southwark on the 17th of January, last month, and the agenda there included an update on National Park plans for 2024, a draft key asks paper for political parties for National Parks England to distribute ahead of the impending elections, national government elections, and the Protected Landscapes Partnership update and a finance update. The meeting concluded with a meeting with Minister Powell, who was new to national parks, her responsibilities, but she did notice that she was the longest serving DEFRA minister. Her previous responsibility had been for water, and elements of some of that meeting will be dealt with, I think, in the Chief Exec's report upcoming. I attended Derbyshire Archaeology Day on the 20th of January at Chesterfield, which is an event organised jointly by staff from the National Park Authority and from Derbyshire County Council and Chesterfield Borough Council, where there are 8 presentations about archaeological projects across Derbyshire and the Peak District. It's back post-COVID now to a sellout, 400 people paid to attend, which is what was the case prior to COVID, so it's good to see that. And good to see the public interest in the cultural heritage of the National Park and, of course, Derbyshire. As a final thing, I've attended 2 meetings of the Governance Working Group, the deliberations of which will be brought to authority in due course. So that covers my element in item 6. So, Phil, item 7, the Chief Exec's report. Now, you will have received a new format Chief Exec's report, a much more detailed exposition on a number of issues, which I hope members you will welcome as a means of imparting more detailed information to you. But in the spirit of receiving only updates, Phil has a number of updates since he wrote this, only a few days ago, that he wishes to bring to your attention. Phil.
Yeah, thanks. Morning, everyone. So the new format, we don't go through what's already been sent to you, but you can pick up from questions. We don't represent that. But there are a few extra bits. So I can now say that we've appointed an authority solicitor, which is fantastic. A woman called Angela Edwards will be joining us 25th of March, which is relatively soon. So that's brilliant. She's a experienced local authority lawyer and was very impressive at interview. We have this week received the announcement of retirement of Chris Dean, who I'm sure you all know, and he's headed up Moors for the Future for over 20 years. So I don't think he's going to put his feet up, but he has given notice that he'll be leaving us. And I've launched now the CEO roadshows. We've got the first few dates. I'm already starting getting emails back supporting that endeavour, wishing me luck. But actually, it's going to be really great to go out to many of our communities and hear what people think. The MP's newsletter, you should all have received that. That went out this week. We will be writing to the Derby and Derbyshire and Nottingham and Nottinghamshire combined authority, the mayoral candidates. We're going to produce a briefing paper on this is what the national park is, because some of them might not really understand what we're about. So we're going to be producing that and sending that out. And we are, it's not in my paper anywhere else, we're taking forward some car parking enforcement proposals. They're going through the correct RMM and PNR and so on, but just so that members know, we're going to be taking in-house the enforcement of car parking, which will mean we can have more control over it and do it in all of our car parks, which we can't do at the moment. So that was a few little updates. Then on Wednesday this week, DEFRA made a major announcement. Sorry, can you see that right? Yeah. So DEFRA made a major announcement that we'd been waiting for a long time on the Protected Landscapes Targets and Outcomes Framework. I'll send these slides round. They have a link to the full announcement there, but this is really significant stuff. This is our most significant stuff, so I wanted to talk members through what this means for us. So this is following the Glover Review. It's following a number of other announcements or trailing that we've been hearing over a year, really. And it's about setting the targets, an outcomes framework and targets for protected landscapes. And really, the government are trying to tie this into the environment plan, which all makes perfect sense, really. But it will have significant impact on us as a national park, on what we report against. So the headlines, really. So there are going to be national targets for protected landscapes. It is all about meeting the goals of the Environment Improvement Plan. and specifically around wildlife, climate change, beauty, heritage and engagement. They are place-based targets, which is what we always wanted. So they are for the whole of the protected landscape. They're not for us as an authority. We will need to work in partnership, as we always do, to deliver these. The targets are set nationally. 3 of them need to be then attributed down to the particular landscape. When I go through the targets, you'll see what I mean there. So that we're going to be given data. We're going to be told on these 10 areas, this is what's currently happening, and this is what you need to kind of make happen. This is where you need to be. And then we'll have to embed all of that in our management plan over the next 18 months. So just in summary, the targets are primarily, they're going to be around nature, biodiversity and climate change. There are some on the historic environment and then some around accessibility. Some of the targets, it's felt, are more defined than others at the moment. They are what we would expect to see in there, and we welcome a lot of what's in there. But they are going to require us to really think through what this means. So I'm just going to go through very briefly the targets, because you'll get to see this in more detail. It only came out on Wednesday. We're still kind of digesting it. But there are 3 categories of targets. The first category are around thriving plants and wildlife, and there are the most targets in this area. So the first one is an example of where there's a target that's national, and what we're going to have to go through a process of now of that 250,000 hectares, how much of that are we going to be given to try and achieve? So that's going to be a process that needs to happen. The second one is around sites, triple SI sites, and their condition. It is tricky because most of those sites in the park we don't own and we're not responsible for. So this is why partnership working is going to be key. The second one again is around triple SIs as well. The fourth one is habitat, really the condition of habitat. So that's triple SIs as well. And then the fifth one is around nature-friendly farming. So this is really encouraging farmers, a bigger proportion of farmers, to put some of their land into nature-friendly farming. How we measure this, we're not quite sure yet. Okay. So the next set are around mitigating, adapting to climate change, and we've got net zero targets, so general reduction in emissions. We've also got the restoration of peatland. So this is another one of the targets where there's a national figure, and we'll have to be given a proportion of that national figure that we're going to be responsible for delivering. And then similarly with the woodland cover, we're going to need to be getting a slice of the overall ambition there. And then finally, the targets here, which we feel are slightly less defined really, around promoting and improving access and engagement, and the number of heritage assets that are designated at risk, reducing that. Obviously that's not the full picture with heritage assets, but these have been set where there is data generally that you can measure. These are measurable. Okay, so that's on the broad picture on the targets. Just a little bit finally on the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. So this, as you know, has a new duty. And these targets and the outcome framework, they're very much linked to this new duty. And the new duty is going to further, basically, public bodies have a duty now to take more, it was to have a regard to, it's now a duty to actually take into account and address our targets in our management plan. So we are expecting interim guidance on what this actually means. So we've got the duty, it's just come in, but what does that mean? How do we put that into effect? So that's coming soon. It is clear that a future funding settlement for protected landscapes and national parks is going to be linked in some way to how we perform under this new framework. So it's absolutely vital for us. We don't know what that means yet, how they will link funding to our outcomes, but that's the direction that it's going in. We are currently looking at a 1-year spending review. That's what officials are working on for 25-26, given the political change that it's expected. So we're just looking, if you like, just an interim 1-year new settlement. And then we would hope there'd be a longer term settlement developed after that. So they are trying to take our baseline and make our baseline bigger. So the money we're being proposed to get next year, for example, which is 500,000 for capital projects, each English National Park is expected to receive that. That would be added to our baseline of what our total grant is. But beyond that, it's all uncertain. We just really don't know what the long-term settlement will be. So that, Chair, is what I wanted to update members on. That's all right.
Thanks, Phil. Normally we would just have both Chair and Chief Exec's reports as for information only, not expect questions. But I think particularly with the most recent issues, the government declarations or statements on Wednesday, bearing in mind that this is early doors, there's a lot of uncertainty, and this is a first slice of that information. Do any members have any questions of Phil about that or any of the other issues he's just updated on? Janet Dugdale.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. And it's good to see we're getting clarity at last on a way forward. I know it's early doors yet, but I assume we're going to have to revisit our management plan, although from memory, we're quite a long way towards what they're looking at anyway. But I guess we're going to have to go back into that process. Are we going to maintain what we've got, or are we going to have to revise it?
Yeah, from what I've seen, I think it's 18 months from now. I think the expectation is we would have a management plan that reflected the outcomes framework. Now that will be about halfway through our management plan period. So it seems reasonable anyway to kind of look at it in those timescales. Whether at that point we set a new 5-year plan or we just tweak the remaining half of our current plan, I think we'll have to decide that. But you're right, a lot of what we're doing in our management plan is doing this stuff anyway. It's just we're going to get a bit more clarity on the numbers and the targets we're expected to meet.
Matt Buckler.
Yeah, it's around Moors of the Future. Obviously, I know Chris really well. It's be interesting to see the work that Moors of the Future are doing delivers 2 of those outcomes, doesn't it? So in terms of peatlands and in terms of the SSI, the SSI figures won't be completable within the national park without continuing the moorland restoration work we're doing. So it'd be really good to make sure that we're we're looking at recognising that, and I'm sure that we all are, and how we adopted the plan for nature in January. Is that right? Are we going to have to look at that again as well?
Do you mean our local nature recovery plan or strategy? Is that what you mean?
No, because the local nature recovery strategy is based on the county council, isn't it?
But we have our own one.
If you call it the strategy, the county council will go berserk. So
plan.
But we adopted at the beginning of the year, I think. So we started at the beginning of the year. We're going to have to look at that again as well.
I don't think that's come to members for adoption yet, has it? I think that's due to come soon. I think that is in the final stages of being consulted on. I mean, I think it's pretty much there. But I think from memory that hasn't come yet, has it, to members? And I think it's March meeting we're planning to bring that. Whether what's in that will need to be changed in the light of this, possibly, we don't know yet. It's really hot off the press and we haven't got a lot of detail yet.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? If not, thank you for that, Phil. And we'll move on to agenda item 8. I'll just reiterate Phil's comment that under the new management of committees, the anticipation is that members will have read the papers that have been sent to them, and we would expect officers and others just to give any updates if they exist, but we would go straight otherwise into members' questions if there are any. So item 8 then is the statement of account and external audit for 22-23, Mark Surridge from Mazars is here and does have some updates that he wishes to bring to members before any questions have come back. So, Mark, do you want to put the mic on?
Thank you. Yes, so our external audit report starts around about page 90 I've got in the pack. And the update is to page 97. Page 97 of the pack is section 2 of our report, status of the audit. As you'd expect, the work that we do is continuous until the point at which we sign the report. So we always set out areas that are ongoing at the point we issue the report. And I can confirm that most of those areas have now been completed. And as a result of that work, there was an additional error that arose that in the accounts, one of which they're relatively small amounts, is about £95,000 additional. And it relates to the valuation of land and buildings as a result of errors in the underlying calculation performed by the valuer, the authority's appointed external valuer. The consequence of that is a book adjustment and has no impact on the authority's revenues, generation, income lines, etc. And reserves. It is merely a presentational item to comply with financial reporting standards. So we expect to then therefore be completed and be signing off your 22-23 accounts with what I'll call it a clean opinion this calendar month.
Thank you, Mark. Right, members, over to you. Do you have any questions or comments on the statement of accounts and external audit for 22-23? Just have one myself, Mark. There's in one section, I think it's on our page 91, it refers to a letter regarding the Derbyshire Pension Fund that was due in January. Then on page 96 it says early February, and I wondered if the latter is correct and we're still expecting that letter.
So yes, it should come through this February. The committee at which they approved the accounts was on the 30th of January. So it's just a matter of timing now.
Right. And that won't have an impact on your issuing your...
No. We need it. We can't sign off without it. But as we are auditors of the pension fund, we kind of know what's going on. So I'm quite comfortable in knowing what the outcome of the letter is. I just need it.
Right. You need the evidence, as it were. Okay, thank you. Charles Greaves.
Yeah, thanks. It's on the theme of the pension fund. I just wanted to get a general idea of what position the pension fund was in and whether or not we're likely to see the possibility of a reduction in contribution rates coming up in the next year or two.
So whilst Mazars is the auditor of the pension fund, it is not me. And I profess to be zero expertise in pension funds. So I'm going to duck out of that one a little bit. The actuarial valuations go up and down every single year. It's highly difficult, and I think this authority's contributions have been set for the next 3 years as a result of so they'll be fixed for the next 3 years until the next time they do a big exercise of working out life expectancies in contributions, and that will be effective from 2026. So I wouldn't expect to see anything until then.
So the bottom line is the current positive valuation is ours for the next couple of years, as it were.
It's going to go up and down.
Yeah.
But your contributions will be fixed. That's in terms of your cash. That's the one that you should really care about.
Okay.
Your contributions, not the value of the fund, because it can move by hundreds of £millions from one year to the next.
Yes, I think those of us who've seen these papers over the years recognise that change. So any other... Janet Dodale again.
Thank you. First of all, can I congratulate the team on having unqualified opinions on this? I think that's a good result for us. So thank you. We do seem at the whim of pensions here in terms of the figures. I'm not a finance person or a pensions person, but they do seem to fluctuate quite a lot, and that seems to affect our accounts. Is that a risk for us? Or is it
In the
something that
most
everybody has
simplest
to put
terms,
up with?
no.
So I hope you're reassured, Janet. Excellent. Simon.
Yeah, it's a similar question, but I mean there are huge movements on the pension scheme, including a 6.9 million movement described as other experience. What does that relate to?
So, I'm really struggling to try and get rid of a lot of the terminology and technical terminology on this. But fundamentally, these numbers in the pension funds, they're accounting transactions and actuarial transactions based on life expectancies. It can reflect the movement in the market. So if you've got assets, you've bought them low and they've gone up in one calendar year, the next calendar year they might come down. It can be affected by, as I say, life expectancy is shifting over the term of as a result of COVID. So that has effect on the actuarial's calculation of what future payments may be in terms of
those are both split
drawdowns.
out separately. So you've got the demographic assumptions and the financial assumptions, which are big movements as well, but they're clear.
Yeah.
This is a separate item.
So those are probably just movements in the assets, the underlying assets, I would expect. So certainly cash and international investments and property funds had moved in the pension funds accounts.
Mark, would it be possible to get a more detailed response to Simon's query? I appreciate that pensions aren't your area of expertise, but it would be useful, I think, for members to get a fuller answer if that was possible.
Certainly, we can pull that out straight from the underlying records that are in the accounts.
Would that help, Simon?
Yes, it would.
Okay. Martin.
Is the pension surplus deficit calculated on the basis of the pension fund basically dying tomorrow, or is it on an ongoing basis? Because all pension funds have this massive changes every year.
Yes, there's an element of assuming that if the pension fund closed on the 31st of March, that's what state it would be in. So at this year end, it has an asset. The previous year, it would have been a liability. But to a large extent, that is not reality, because the pension fund will continue, and it will continue to be invested in, and people will continue to make transactions and drawdowns from it.
Because the reality is that it's very unlikely that a government-based pension scheme is going to collapse ever. So some of these calculations are, to a certain extent, fictional.
They are, and that's why there's no impact on the authority's reserves of any of these movements. They're all completely written out of through accounting measures.
Okay, on that positive note, Martin. Are there any other comments or questions that anyone has? If not, can we move to the recommendations on page 15 to approve the audited statement of accounts, to consider and note the external auditor's completion report at Appendix 2, and to note the letter of management representation, which needs to be signed ultimately by the Chief Finance Officer. Can I have a show of hands, all those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? That's unanimous, so thank you. Thank you, Mark. If we can move on to item 9 in that case, which is the annual governance statement. And Ruth, you're going to present this, are you?
No updates.
No, yes, I'm sorry, I'm still... Everyone's got to get used to this, as well, including me. So there are no updates to that report. So members, do you have any comments or questions of Ruth about this item? It's not mandatory, but Simon, and then Patrick.
I've got a specific question, I guess, and then a more general observation. But from page 139 onwards, you compare the arrangements against the core principles set out in the governance code. And in core principle A, which is acting with integrity and ethical values and respecting the rule of law, you identify funding from DEFRA as being a constraint on our ability to act with integrity and ethically. And I don't think that's appropriate.
Sorry, which page? Sorry.
This is 139.
139.
So 139 of 210, sorry, that's on my...
It's 133.
So it's the core principle, so it's it is page 139 on my presentation.
It's a different one on the hard copy, I'm afraid,
Sorry.
Simon.
hard copy, it's 133.
Yes, core principle A. Yes.
So is it item 3 on that?
It's, item 2 and 3, they both relate to funding, and it's saying that non-inflationary funding increase is impacting our ability to act with integrity and ethically, which I just think in principle is not right.
Justine got any comments?
I would say the intent is around the effectiveness. Therefore, if we have strained resources, so it's actually sort of issues around identified which affect effectiveness. It's around that resourcing and the ability to be effective in acting. There isn't that direct correlation around we're not going to behave with integrity, we're not going to be ethical. But in terms of being an effective authority, when your resources are constrained, then that is obviously an issue.
I can see how that might affect some of the other core principles, but I think in relation to this specific core principle, that it would be wrong to say that we will tolerate unethical behaviour because of funding constraints. It's just not appropriate.
I take your point. That's not the intention of that issue, but I can take your point.
Yeah.
So how can that be accommodated then? How can we accommodate Simon's comment, which you'd take as a point, but it's still in there under core principle A?
Could we reword it? What is it?
With it, I don't know right now. I'd have to think about it, Simon, because it might be that we take it out and it makes sure that it goes into one of the other principles.
Janet Doughnall.
Yeah, can I just suggest it might fit in core principles D or E, which are to do with achievement of intended outcomes and issue things relating to delivery rather than our sort of behaviour. I think you might find they fit better in one of those later principles.
Okay. So what is it?
And then if I may, there's
Sorry,
a more
Simon.
general observation is that this is a long rehearsal of the governance arrangements that we have, which is helpful. But there's actually very little in here about the effectiveness of those government arrangements in achieving the outcomes that we want. And actually in the reconciliation back to our core principles, the recurring theme is lack of funding. But if we're looking at our governance arrangements, we really should be looking at the effectiveness of those arrangements to deliver the outcomes that we want in climate change, landscape, nature recovery, and so on. And that's not addressed at all here.
Well, we can take those points forward, and we will be reviewing these issues because these are from last year. So we're preparing for the annual governance statement for this year, in which we review these issues and see what's changed, if we've met, if we can update any, if any have been gone away, and we'll be producing new issues with the new statement.
I think there's a cogent point, Simon, and I think within the context of the Governance Working Party and the general review of governance, that, as Ruth said, this is something that, this is a backward-looking report, inevitably, but in terms of looking at how these issues are dealt with in the future, I think it would be appropriate for the Governance Working Party to look at. I know, Janet, it's another task on your broad shoulders, but I think it's appropriate that we take on board these points.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I totally agree that I think subsuming what's in here and understanding what's in here in relation to the governance working group it would be a helpful way forward.
Thank you. James Beresford.
Thank you, Chair. In the light of Simon's comments,
Patrick.
should we not be looking to amend recommendation 2?
Recommendation 2. What I was going to suggest was, sorry about that, on the back of Simon's initial comment was that officers should look at the issue that he raised, move the draft accordingly, and I would ask members to enable the chair to sign these off if the content is appropriate, if the elements are moved to a more appropriate section, that I would then sign them off on behalf of members in future.
Okay, so is there an additional recommendation then?
I think that it would be an amendment to recommendation 1.
Insofar as what we're doing is reviewing this and taking it forward.
Yes.
Yeah, so you'd have to amend that.
Yeah, so
Some-
appropriate wording.
So you could approve for sign-offs by Chief Executive Chair Authority, subject to officers reviewing the relevant sections.
Core principle A.
Yeah,
Would that be acceptable?
and the chair being
Delegated.
to the chair to agree the changes.
Will that be acceptable to members, to Simon particularly? Sorry, Patrick, we'll come back to that, but Patrick Brady.
Simon's point is one I was going to make as well, and I think it also applies in that particular section to paragraph 3, the impact of the non-inflationary 3-year funding thing. The heading of this is quite clearly about integrity and ethical values, and I don't think those things impact upon it. I do wonder where these core principles come from. I'm sure they may have been around for a while. I don't remember particularly our turning our mind to what they say, but they do to a certain extent overlap each other. So, for example, core principle B talks about openness and stakeholder engagement, whereas core principle G talks about transparency. And when you start duplicating like that, it does make it that much more difficult to put things in the right boxes. And that slightly worries me. Again, going back to core principle A, number 1 is the impact of the impact. There's a grammatical issue there. And then going on to core principle G, implementing good practices in transparency, etc. Those things do help to deliver accountability, but there are other things that will deliver accountability as well. But that is a sort of duplication, and I'm surprised that there is absolutely nothing we're doing about it. And of course we are doing something about it, because we resolved, I think, in December, that we were going to look at some transparency issues in relation to access for asking members, talking to committees and public representations and things. So I think there's a gap there which we haven't filled.
But this is for 22-23, Patrick, rather than 23-24, which was last December.
Oh, okay. But even so, I'm slightly surprised that there's absolutely nothing against that we're saying we're going to do, particularly as the main purpose of this is filling, sort of ticking a few boxes for whoever reads these things, presumably down in London.
Yeah, I take the point you're making. I think I would ask if you could bear with us And these are issues that the Governance Working Party needs to address in conjunction with officers. And we can make clear to members where the core principles have come from when they were adopted, and look at the ways in which they are reflected in future reports.
They say all the right things, Chairman. They just slightly say them in a way that's not helpful to putting this sort of document together.
Sure.
Chair, may I answer that question?
Yeah, you may. Yep.
Patrick, they're actually prescribed to us by SIPFA. They aren't of our own wording. So if they're so if the wording is repetitive and overlapping, how we interpret that is up to us. But the actual core principles themselves are given to us.
Okay, thank you, Justine. Are there any other comments or questions? If not, with an amendment to recommendation 2, as read out previously, that it would be subject to officers addressing the issues raised and then delegated to Chief Executive Chair to sign on behalf of members, are you content to vote on the recommendations? Yeah. Matt Buckler, before we go?
Yeah.
Simon, your
are we?
microphone's on still.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is that going to be prior to it going to the governance working group, or is that going to be in consultation with the governance?
It would have to be prior to. This is a backward-looking report. The format is one that's established. We will look at the format and the content, the nature of the content for future reports.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so on that basis, can I have a show of hands? All those in favour of recommendations? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. That's passed NEMCON. Item 10, Internal Audit Report, Block 1, 2324. Mark Thomas from Verito is here and tells me that he has no updates, so he looked quite relieved at the idea of not having to do a presentation. So, members, any comments or questions on the report before you? It's not mandatory, but in that case, if there are no comments or questions, Mark, you've got off quite lightly, and I would suggest. So, oh, do beg your pardon, Matt. Buckler.
Apologies. It was good to see the audit report on the work that More for the Future have been doing. I just wanted to make that comment.
Yep, that's fine. Yeah, just reinforcing. If there are no further comments or questions, the recommendations on the bottom of page 137 on the hard copy, the internal report. I beg your pardon, Patrick, I can't see you.
We have to sort of decide what to do with this recommendation, Chairman, because when you go over the page, we'd have to consider actions.
And the agreed actions considered, right? It's the actions in the appendices. It's, as I understand it, we can consider them without having to debate them in public. I see. So what you're suggesting is that recommendation should finish after received?
Fine by me, Chairman, yes.
Okay. Does any member object to that amendment? If not, can I suggest that the recommendation now stops after the third line of be received, and we delete and the agreed actions considered, as it isn't an activity that we're going to undertake in this forum. On that basis, members, could I have a show of hands accepting the recommendation, please? Thank you. And any against? Any abstentions? Yep, thank you, members. We can move on to, thank you, Mark. At least kept the seat warm, pro tem. Can move on to agenda item 11 then, the revenue budget 24-25 and medium-term financial plan 24-25 to 27-28. I believe, Justine, this is your baby.
I have no updates.
You had no updates? In that case, members, do you have any questions or comments of Justine on this issue? It's quite an important one. It's only next year's budget. But if everyone is suitably approving, or at least not disapproving, of the proposed budget and the recommendations. Patrick, it's okay. It's Martin, I'm afraid, is sitting between thee and me, so I can't see you.
Sorry to be a nuisance, Chairman. It's looking at the wording of the recommendations. Recommendations 3. Members note the plan. Do we note it or do we approve it?
It's a good question. Justine, would you care to elucidate?
As it's a forecast, I would say you note it, but the budget is approved, so we're asking for the 24-25 budget to be approved, but the medium-term financial plan is a forecast, and therefore I would recommend it is noted.
I can see the wisdom of that. Is that acceptable to you, Patrick? Good question. Okay. In that case, you see the recommendations that the annual budget for 24-25, as shown in Appendix 1, be approved. The members approve the increase of the vacancy factor from 4% to 5%, and that members note the medium-term financial plan for the authority 24-25 to 27-28. What I realise is that I haven't been asking previously for anyone to nominate or to second the... I've been moving it from the chair. Yeah.
Can I ask a question on the budget, please?
Yes, you can.
So it's taking me a bit of time to get my head around each paper as they come in, but while we're being asked to decide if there's any questions on it or not. We're increasing the vacancy factor from 4% to 5%, which I completely understand why we're doing that. But can I ask what the vacancy factor currently is? So we have some measure of realism against that.
It's 6% plus, I think, if I remember rightly.
So the outturn for 22-23, I appreciate is a short while ago, but that was at 7%, and the at Q2 it was 6%.
Okay.
And I don't see any change between Q2 and Q3 other than increasing.
Okay, so rather than moving it from the chair, as I've got into the custom of doing, Andrew, proposed, seconded by Janet. Thank you very much. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you, that's unanimous. And that means that Justine is going to make a hasty retreat from this committee, and today is her final day of employment with the National Park Authority. So it just behoves me, I think, to thank her most sincerely for the work that she's done as with the finances over the 3 years that she's been with us, and to wish her every success in her new job and for her future, whatever that might hold. I think one of the principal successes has been the conversion to the new finance system. She may not think that, but at least the outputs that come to members, I think, have benefited from the new system. So thank you for that in detail, but thank you generally.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much.
Can we minute the fact that she found it a pleasure to be here?
Wonderful drive through the countryside.
Thank you, Justine. Right, to cover just any embarrassment that I might have delivered, we'll move hastily on to agenda item 12, which is the appointment of the interim chief financial officer. Now, Ben, are you going to... Oh, you're going to leave us, aren't you? Having introduced us, because Ben's covered in this report, he's going to now absent himself. So, thank you. So, Phil, you introducing us? Oh, it's Emily. Who's... I know. It's been a long week, and I'm still getting used to the new system. So as far as I'm aware, there are no updates to this report. So are there any questions or comments? It's a processual issue which we have to go through in order to have all our ducks lined up, as it were. If there are no comments or questions, the recommendations at 2 on page 171 to appoint the interim finance manager as interim chief financial officer, section 151 officer, from the 2nd of February, that's today, until the first day of service of a permanent finance manager. And then the second recommendation, to delegate the appointment of the chief finance officer to the chief exec in conjunction with the chair of the authority as part of the appointment process for the permanent finance manager. Can I have a nominator? Thank you, Andy Nash. You happy to second, Andrew Hart? Thank you. Can I have a show of hands, all those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you, that's unanimous. Again, this is going splendidly, isn't it? We move on to item 13, which is the authority plan for 23-28 update and year 2 look forward. I've not been told there are any updates. So, James Beresford.
Thank you, Chair. I know we don't want to drag out discussions on papers that members have already seen. And that's not my intention, really. Members around this table who've been through this process a few times, and there are members around this table who've been through this process a few times, will recognise that this is a much improved document from its predecessors. And I'd just like to thank Emily and Simon for their hard work in making sure that what we have in front of us is more measurable and holds us to account more clearly than we have been in future. I don't really propose to highlight any of the specific actions, but it gives me greater confidence that certainly officers are in a position to better monitor the activities of the authority and report that back to members. We may face changes through DEFRA interventions in future, but I think this is flexible enough to account for those and take those on board. So I would like to move it, Chair.
Thank you, James. And Andrew Hart seconded. Thank you. Simon.
Just a question.
Certainly.
On objective E, we are, which relates to access and the critical success for this year is that the rights of way that are easy to use matches or exceeds the national average. There are plenty of landowners who have no interest in making rights of way easy to use. Shouldn't we as a national park be aspiring to exceed rather than merely match the national average?
It may be based on the percentages that exist at the present. I don't know. Emily, are you any enlightenment? But it is matches or exceeds.
Yeah,
So.
I think it should be exceeds. I mean, we're setting a pretty low standard if we are only adopting the ease of access that all other landowners use.
You're very happy to hear from Emily on this, but I mean, as I understand it, we're not in control of some of the quality of these things.
It's maintain national park management parks.
Right. Yep. Emily?
I think we've not set ourselves too high a target on that one, is in terms of our resources and our ability and the knowledge that actually it takes a lot of resources to exceed a national average. So we don't want to go too high, and I think also it comes back to the conversation that we've had in this room a number of times, that DEFRA are performance managing and monitoring us on the authority plan. So if we go too high with any of the targets, we're at risk of not meeting those targets, and there's the potential within our contract with DEFRA that they can claw back our finances. So it's in that knowledge of everything. We don't want to go too high. It doesn't mean that we can't exceed, it's just that that's a bit more of an ambition.
James Beresford.
I think if it gives Simon some comfort, ambition is also reflected in the National Park Management Plan. And given your comment about farmers and other landowners, I suspect that ambition to improve access to rights of way will also be addressed through the management plan, because we can't do this alone. we can do the things that we can control ourselves. But in terms of increasing and improving, Derbyshire County Council, other landowners, National Trust, all will be involved and all are focused into the National Park Management Plan. But I get your point, we shouldn't undercook our ambition for our own responsibilities.
Can I suggest as well, Simon, that perhaps we leave it as it is this time round and review it for next year against the whatever is achieved in the course of the next year? Ask officers to take the comment on board and bear it in mind for future. Sorry.
Yeah, no, just to make an additional point, I mean, I think people do understand this, but if the condition of rights of way remains static every year, I think it's reasonable for us to, gradually improve them and exceed things. But we only need a few poor weather events, and just to maintain things can take a lot of resource that we weren't expecting. And we've seen, particularly this year, some really bad weather events and some real deterioration in footpaths. If anyone's been along Lathkildale recently, there's about a foot deep, gully washed into that. Now, just repairing that alone is going to take a lot. Now, that's a National Nature Reserve, it's Natural England, but if that had happened on one that we're responsible for, suddenly, even just maintaining rather than exceeding would take a huge amount of resource. So I think we do have to be mindful of the impacts of climate and weather on our ability to do this work with our restricted budgets.
Okay. Patrick Brady.
Struggling a bit with these. When does this start? I'm not quite sure what a decile is, though I think it's explained in another report. Are these running from 2003, or are they running from 1st of April 2024?
So Decile 2 is where we are now. So if you remember, we've reported on Decile 1, which is the first half of the year that we're in now. And we'll be coming back to the May Authority to report on Decile 2. So that's the mid-year point to the year-end point. And then the second column on the paper in front of you, next year, so the 24-25.
So when it says new action added where activity will not commence until, that means it's going to commence?
In the next year's plan.
Okay, right. Just 2 points, Chairman, if I may. The very first item on the list, the review of the targets for planning enforcement, is it not slightly bigger than that? Should it not be that we have a full review of the enforcement plan by 24-25? That's appearing in another list I've seen somewhere. It's not just targets, it's the whole enforcement plan.
Mm-hmm. As I recall, the enforcement plan is up for review in 24-25.
Yeah. Well,
if I can respond to that, the action is the first column, so that's review, update and implement local enforcement plan. The second column, critical success Decile 2, is the target for the period that we're in now. And the third column, the critical success factor 24-25, is how we'll be performance monitoring in the next year. So the actions in that left hand, the first column. And then you've got the linked target of how, or the critical success factor of how we performance monitor that particular action.
Okay, well, I suppose it's a matter of wording. Okay, and the other one is on page, our page 185, page 7 and 9 of the forms. The target objective F, and the responsible officer is the authority solicitor, stroke head of resources, which I think is an issue in itself. But the third one down, no judicial review, no maladministration charges, no ombudsman complaints, are all laid at their door. But it's not in their control, in their ability to control those things. For example, if an ombudsman complaint arises because a planning officer hasn't put up a site notice, it's absolutely no concern of the head of resources or the monitoring officer, but you're making them the accountable officer for what happens. There must be something wrong in that.
So each of the objectives usually has one post that's responsible, so it's the most appropriate. It might be, and in that particular case where it's across the whole organisation, it's still about one post having that. Now the reason that this has 2 posts is because the rest of them are all under the head of resources, but in the realisation that actually this falls into the monitoring officer role as well, we've put it across 2 because it's a double accountant of that particular one, if that helps.
And presumably the head of resources is there because it's that team that would be dealing with these issues if they arise. They will be the lead, and if it was something to do with a planning issue, they would have to liaise with the head of planning to resolve it. But the responsibility for dealing with maladministration or ombudsman's issues lies with the head of resources, yes?
Well, that's probably true, but if you start putting colour blocks in, like we used to, I don't know whether that's intended for the future, but if you start putting colour blocks in, this will come up red, but because of something that's happened in another department, and yet the accountable officer is the one here. I think that needs reading through again and thinking about exactly what the accountability of the head of resources is in that particular case, because as it stands at the moment, it's not right.
Phil?
Yeah, always welcome your wisdom on these things, Patrick, and I'm happy to look at it. But the way I read it is that actually it would be for those responsible officers to make sure that everyone in the authority was acting in a way that didn't open us up to ombudsman complaints being upheld. So although it may be a planning officer putting the wrong notice up or not putting a notice up, for me, I would see those responsible officers kind of talking to the planning department, making sure they know what they should be doing so that they don't make mistakes like that. So I do see them kind of being accountable for setting the standards and the practice that avoid these things happening.
A slightly different target, if I may say so.
Right, I think we can probably argue about the number of angels on the head of this particular pin for quite a while, but I suggest that we take your comments on board, Patrick, and ask officers to consider them for the production of the future reports to the organisation. Not wishing to be left out, I thought I would just pick up on the final objective, H, the critical success for 24-25 has projects identified by March 24. Is that the correct date, or should it be 25? Because we're looking at success for 24-25, presumably.
Yeah, I think it might be the wrong date. I think there might be a slight blip, but it will be, the critical success factor will be the projects that are identified. Well, they will be identified by March, but they'll be implemented from the 1st of April 24 onwards. It's a bit confusing, so we'll have a look at the language on that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are there any other comments from members and questions? If not, on the basis of discussion and the responses received, I have 3 recommendations: to approve the updated Plan 23-28, to approve the Year 2 Look Forward actions, and that any necessary changes to the proposed wording of the updated Plan 23-28 are delegated to the Chief Exec in consultation with the Chair of the Authority. Can I have a mover? Andrew Hart and Lee Hart. You happy to second? Lee Hartson. Show of hands, members. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. So thank you, members. We move on to item 14 in the Matt Buckler.
Yes, I did not declare an interest in this paper at the start of the on this report at the start of the meeting, and I should have done. I'm a member of the Farming into Protected Landscapes panel on behalf of the environmental NGOs.
Right. So does that? Do you feel that you need to absent yourself from discussion in this?
I
is it a prejudicial interest that you're declaring?
I'm happy to be guided by other people.
So should Matt move out?
What are we asking?
He's a part of the FIPL board that considers the grants. Answer forthcoming.
Probably best to step out then.
Thank you, Matt. Do you have any updates? Right. Okay, Matt has done the honourable thing and absented himself from this for this item. There are no updates to this report, members. So, does anyone have any questions or comments to or of Suzanne Fletcher? Andrew Gregory.
I'd just like to say that I very much welcome this, and I'm very happy to move the proposal.
Thank you, Andrew. There are no other comments. Does anyone wish to second the Andrew Hart? Thank you. Show of hands, members. All those in favour of accepting the report, the recommendations. Any against? Any abstentions? That's unanimous again. So thank you for that. So it's just an exercise. If we can move on to agenda item 15 in that case. Oh yeah, could we call Matt? Thank you, Andrew. I just forget. It's been a long week. Just had time to make a cup of tea, eh, Matt? Barely, right. Okay. In that case, agenda item 15, proposed changes to the membership of the Planning Committee and Programmes and Resources Committee. As far as I'm aware, there are no updates. So are there any questions, queries or comments? Patrick?
I move that Councillor Jean Warmby be nominated to replace Chris O'Leary.
Thank you, Patrick, as long as Jean is happy with that. Yes, she is. Is there a seconder? Andrew Gregory, I beg your pardon. All those in favour? A show of hands. Any against? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Thank you, members. Oops.
Sorry, the first one was to move Councillor Leary to Programmes and Resources. Are we happy that that's...
Right,
it's
they've
okay,
approved
they
the
just
recommendation.
jump the gun,
Yeah, yeah. Well, the recommendation's been approved, so yeah. Okay, and finally, almost, agenda item 16 then, proposed Derbyshire Dales District Council and Peak District National Park Authority joint working group on housing in the National Park and appointment of members. There are no updates as far as I am aware. Matt Buckler.
Do I have to declare an interest in this as well as a Derbyshire Dales representative?
I don't think so. I think it's perfectly appropriate as representative of Derbyshire Dales, though of course you leave that hat behind as you enter this room and are looking to further National Park Authority aims and objectives.
I recognise that. And is that not a conflict of interest?
I don't think so. I think probably we'd have to behead a few members if that was the case. I'm content with Matt staying, and I'm advised that that's appropriate. Just as there are no updates, I'll come to you in a moment, Kath. What I'm proposing is that rather than try to appoint members from this meeting, any members who wish to be considered for appointment to this panel, this group, should email myself and Phil Mulligan as Chief Exec by 9 o'clock on the morning of Wednesday next. And if there are more expressions of interest than there are places, then we will select who is deemed to be most appropriate to represent the authority. If that doesn't ruffle too many feathers, but I can imagine we could spend quite a lot of time going round trying to appoint from people who express an interest. Kath Potter. Then Andy Nash.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to acknowledge the efforts over many years of Chris Vaness and David Chapman, both members of Derbyshire Dales District Council, who were on here, who have long requested this approach. So I think it'd be very nice to let them know that at last this is being discussed and there is a way forward.
Thank you, Kath. I'm sure we can ensure that that happens. Andy Nash.
I appreciate the idea of taking email options, but would it be good to take a straw poll just to see if you actually have 3 members before we leave this room?
I think in principle it's a good idea, but I think as well that some members might wish to ruminate on it over the weekend. But yeah. Yeah. But they weren't aware of what the election process might be, or appointment process might be. Can we do that then, a straw poll, as to who amongst the membership might wish to be considered at this stage for...
Ken, not me, but Annabelle Harling's contacted me to say she'd be interested.
Right. Patrick and Martin and Andy. You see, we're already into 4. I'm not going to say I told you so, but that was my expectation. Okay, so we've at least 4 members who might wish to be representatives. So, again, we'll note those names. There's no need, I think, for those 4 people to email Phil and myself. But if anyone else wishes in the course of the weekend to be considered, then please, by 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning. Which brings us back to the recommendations, which is to agree to set up... Beg your pardon? I do beg your pardon. Andrew Gregory.
Sorry, Chair, just occurs to me, there are, of course, some members not here this morning who won't know about this proposed deadline of the 7th of February. So perhaps we should make certain that everyone has had the opportunity.
This is a good point, Andrew. Thank you. And Ruth is going to email members who aren't here to let them know. Excuse me. Are there any other comments or questions about this particular issue? If not, there are 3 recommendations: to agree to set up the working party with Derbyshire Dales District Council, to appoint 3 members, and to confirm attendance at meetings is an approved duty for the payment of travel and subsistence allowances as set out in Schedule 2 of the Members' Allowance Scheme, which doubtless you are all familiar with. On that basis...
Chairman, I think the correct process for item 2 is to delegate to the Chief Executive the right to appoint the 3 members after consultation with yourself and whoever.
Yep. So on that basis, if it's delegated to the Chief Exec in consultation with the Chair of the Authority, the amendment to that second recommendation, on that basis, could I have someone move the... Andrew Hart, thank you. Andrew Gregory, you happy to second? Yep, thank you. And on that basis, a show of hands, all those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. That's unanimous again. Item 17, reports from outside bodies. None have been submitted. So, in that basis, members, we can conclude this meeting. But before we... Andrew, I beg your pardon. Andrew Hart.
Just a brief verbal update about Enjoy Staffordshire. I've just been informed they're going through a transformation process at the moment. There's been recent government reports regarding future of tourism. So once they've gone through that that process, I will report back.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for that update. So, members, Lee Hodson?
Just as a point, really, that the papers, the hard copies, aren't following the numbers, page numbers.
Yeah.
And we could do with that sorting, really, on the digital
So do they not on the...
format. It's because they do a blank page. But that blank page is counted as a page.
Right. Ruth, do you...
Yeah, if you look at the... So it depends at which way you look at them on the electronic version. If you look at the full pack, then it's the same as the printed version. If you look at them individually, then they might differ slightly because you won't get the blank page as much. But we can see if we can sort it out.
I think, yeah, if you can see and inform members as to how they can best conform with, so we're all talking from the same page. Yeah, there's a saying in there somewhere. Can I remind members, we've finished with the authority meeting, but there is the members' forum, which will start at past, to give people time for a comfort break, get a cup of tea. You had the agenda, and I should have said this at the beginning, the agenda for the members' forum came round with just the National Park Training Academy